Hi, I'm Omer Sergi from the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures in Tel Aviv University. And today I would like to speak a little bit about a unique and special phenomena which happened in our region around 3,000 years ago. And this is the state formation in the early Iron Age Levant. The Levant is defined as a narrow, hospitable, and fertile strip here along the eastern Mediterranean coast, which is sandwiched between the Syro-Arabian desert from the east and the Mediterranean from the west. Throughout the second and the first millennia BCE, Levantine societies were bordered by and were often dominated by the great cultures of Egypt, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia. It was only for a short period of time in the early Iron Age, between the 12th and the 8th centuries BCE, that the Levant was not ruled by strong external powers and took the socio-political form of a network of inland kin-based territorial polities. The territorial polities were a new and a one-time phenomenon that were forged and maintained in a very specific political landscape. Biblical Israel and Judah, here, like the Aramean kingdoms to their north, were manifestations of this exact phenomenon of state formation in the early Iron Age Levant. These kingdoms prevailed, however, only for a short period of time. During the late 8th and throughout the 6th centuries BCE, the rising Assyrian, Babylonian empires destroyed these kingdoms and annexed their territories. In fact, since then, the Levant was mostly ruled by empires, from the Persians and the Romans in antiquity to the British and the French in modernity. The only other occasion in which the Levant was reconstructed into local territorial polities was just recently, during the decolonization in the second half of the 20th century, when nation-states like Israel, Syria, Lebanon, or Jordan were formed. But in this lecture, I should probably focus on Levantine state formation in the early Iron Age. During most of the second half of the second millennium BCE, the Levant was characterized by imperial powers. Egypt in the south, and Mitanni. Here is Mitanni, here is Egypt. And later, the Hittite kingdom that ruled the north. The Hittites and the Egyptians had a political and an economic control over local powers. These local powers may be called city-states. They were mostly constituted by a territory dominated by a city in which there was a palace symbolizing the centralized institutions. The end of this system was marked by the collapse of the central Hittite rule in the northern Levant and by the retreat of imperial Egyptian rule from the southern Levant, accompanied with the destruction of many of the urban centers. It was this collapse that enabled the reconfiguration of social and political life throughout the Levant. In the past, it was assumed that invaders, Luvians and Arameans in the Syro-Anatolian region and Israelites in the southern Levant were responsible for the collapse of regional systems and later for the foundation of the territorial kingdoms. However, not only does this theory raise some serious historical difficulties, archaeological studies conducted in recent decades highlight continuity in many aspects of material culture throughout Syria and Canaan. This continuity is also observed in some cultural aspects of the social life, like the use of language or the system of beliefs. It is therefore widely agreed today that Israelites, Arameans, or Luvians were neither invaders nor migrants, and certainly not foreign to the Levant. They were rather the indigenous population of the Levant in changing social conditions. It was the collapse of the late Bronze Age hierarchy with its former urban elites that enabled the rise of new elites which did not necessarily originate in the traditional urban system and could also come from marginal groups. State formation in the Iron Age Levant should therefore be considered as a social transformation, a process during which the ruling elites that were formerly related to the systems and to the imperial powers were replaced by new elites of different origin who found its legitimacy in a different social structure. One expression of this social development may be observed in the use of language and script. During the Late Bronze Age, communication between local rulers and regional powers was done in the Old Babylonian language using the cuneiform script. This communication system fell out of use in the Iron Age and was replaced by the earliest attempts to have the local spoken languages committed to writing through specific scripts. From the 9th century on, we see in the epigraphic finds the earliest appearances of local dialects such as Hebrew, Aramaic, Moabite, or Ammonite. They were committed to writing through specific and differentiated scripts. These finds reflect an apparently conscious attempt at shaping royal language. The ongoing use of a standardized royal language and script must have contributed to a sense of self-awareness. For the first time in history, Levantine scribes represented the world in their own vernaculars and introduced historical narratives in West Semitic languages. The content of these inscriptions create the notion of culturally and politically unified territorial kingdom under the rule of a local dynasty and its patron deity. These inscriptions propose a new kind of political order, not only in their content, but also in the very form. They employ writing and script in the service of state formation, and in a much broader sense, in the construction of new political identities and cultural memories, at least among the newly rising elites. The use of written vernaculars also reflect on the localization of political power in the Iron Age Levant, and by doing so, it captures the very essence of Levantine state formation. One last point that I would like to mention. Past evolutionary approaches to state formation in the early Iron Age Levant assumed a sharp dichotomy between the tribe and the state. The tribe being more mobile and based on kinship identity, and the state being more sedentary based on urban political identity. Accordingly, state formation was viewed as a process that resulted from sedentarization or conquest that led to the suppression of kinship relations. However, ethnographic studies indicate that groups organized in tribal systems maintain a flexible way of life, moving between different modes of mobile pastoralism and village-based agriculture. Sedentary and mobile populations could all coexist within one and same kinship group. Textual sources, including the Book of Genesis, for instance, indicate that ancient Near Eastern societies consider themselves as part of one social family, divided not by mode of life or place of residence, but according to traditional association of kin. In essence, kinship relations were utilized to stretch time and space and to enable a conception of common identity with unknown others. They appear to maintain strong integrity over long periods of time. Thus, for instance, 9th century BCE Mesha inscription presents Mesha as the king of Moab, the Dibonite. Apparently, Mesha did not identify himself as a Moabite, that is, the territorial polity that he ruled, but as a Dibonite, probably his kinship identity. There are therefore no evolutionary relations between the tribe and the state, as they represent contemporaneous identities. Rather than bringing the dissolution of the kinship ties, the emerging state contained them, incorporating different kin-based communities within a more centralized structure. Moreover, as kinship provided organizing principles for the entire society, both the tribe and the state shared a conceptual unity. It was the metaphorical extension of kinship itself that provided the vocabulary needed to conceptualize the Levantine states. This demonstrates that the appearance of new ethnicities or identities and different modes of social belongings in the Iron Age Levant was the result of new social and political configurations on the very local level. In the absence of a dominant elite, as it was before, for instance, with Egypt, the newly rising political powers employed symbols of social identity from different sets of prestigious cultural traits that they had in their disposal, whether they inherited those from the late Bronze Age or newly forged them in the Iron Age. In many respects, the emergence of these new identities, like Israel, Aram, and Moab, may also be seen as a new construct, the intellectual product of state formation. Namely, new identities were the outcome of the constant need to form politically and socially unified structure under one centralized rule. All the while, it was also the outcome of the need to legitimize the power of this centralized rule. The result was what we call the state formation of the Iron Age Levant. Thank you very much for your attention.